What are some universal errors that you see people commonly make with takedowns?
I think number one, the mindset. I think kids that grew up wrestling or kids that grew up doing judo are a lot less afraid of falling down. I think a lot of the grapplers and the jiu-jitsu guys are terrified of falling down, and really, what they're really afraid of, I think, is somebody picking them up and slamming them. If you have somebody that's picking you up and slamming you as part of the drill, like, you've got kind of an airhead on your hands. Like, they don't really know what they're doing to begin with. And that's as simple as, one, changing training partners, or two, just communicating like, hey man, how about you don't pick me up and slam me? Right? Like, I mean, like, even in wrestling, you don't particularly pick your partners up and slam them. Like, like, it's very rare that you have. And I guess I distinguish what's different between a slam where you're kind of intentionally trying to hurt somebody versus getting amplitude, because there's a difference, right? Like, amplitude is something where you get somebody's legs up off the ground, you like flare them out, or you pick them up, or even on a throw, like, done correctly, the guy that's falling should land relatively safely and cleanly. Now in judo, those guys are mean. They'll try to hurt you, right? That's their whole thing, is to try to knock you out with a throw. And so they land differently than wrestlers do. So you're, in all honesty, relatively safe if you're training with a guy that's halfway decent in wrestling. So I think the mindset is the first mistake, and understand that it's not the Olympics and you're not trying to murder each other, right? Like, you've got to get the drills down, you've got to get the reps in, and teaching yourself wrestling or learning how to wrestle, like I say, is significantly more dependent on repetitions than anything you're going to ever do with jiu-jitsu. It just is, because again, you're training basically your feet and your balance, and that is it's super critical. And you're trying to off balance other people, and I think it takes, honestly, more work to be able to do that than just framing people. So the mindset. The second thing is understanding basics of stance. So in the DVD, we go over stance and positioning, the difference between a defensive stance or a square stance, where you're standing and your feet and your knees are aligned with your shoulder, versus a staggered or an attack stance, where you have one foot forward and your knees are over your feet and over your foot, and your elbow and your shoulder lead over that same knee. So the stance is the other part of it. And that stance primarily, like, depending on what you're doing. Okay. So there's a low stance, which is more for a freestyle or a folk style type wrestling. There's a mid-level stance, which is better for, like, grappling. Grappling, you don't want to put your head down too low. You don't want to have it too high. If it's too low, they'll jump over your head and choke you. If you're too low, they'll just slide on your legs and leg lock you or start sweeping you. If in Greco and judo, you have to stand more upright, almost like a slightly lower boxing stance. Like, so if you see guys standing up for boxing, they still have a lot of spring and bend in their legs. That's just a little bit lower would be a good Greco stance, and or like judo stands up a little bit more than that. But I found that if your legs are too straight, if your knees aren't bent, you're going to move a lot less smoothly and athletically. So you run into trouble there. So the next one would be the stance. So mindset, stance, and then 3 would just be spending time on it, right? Takedowns are something that it's very natural to push somebody, but it's a little bit unnatural of moving that body weight while they're off balance, and then you consequently lose a degree of balance, or you can lose a degree of balance if you're not careful and you don't understand the position. So working through that, just the timing and the balance, is a critical part to being successful with taking people from the standing position to the ground. And if you get good at that, you can really, you can control at least 1/3 of the match, if not more, because you have that area covered. And most guys just say, well, I'll take this match or take this fight wherever it goes. I'm like, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Why wouldn't you want to force somebody to play where you want them to be? Like, even if the guy is really good on bottom and you're really good on top, wouldn't you still rather have your best position against his best position? Maybe you can use your best position to put him into a worse position. You know what I mean? So, like, I'd rather have my best versus somebody else's best. Ideally, I want my best versus their worst, but I don't want to put my worst against their best, right? So you've got to make some decisions there. But those three, like I say, the mindset, the stance, and then the timing and the balance are the three probably biggest errors that people make right away. And then, like I say, I like the way that I've set things up with really following that the four angles of attack, because again, it allows you to plug and play. That's where I think, like, a lot of guys that get into wrestling or jiu-jitsu, they end up becoming technique catalogs, and you have to scroll through this flipping catalog to figure out the right response, when in reality it's like, look, you don't have time for that. You've got to say, okay, what area am I in, and now I need to have a response. And so having 1,000 techniques, it's great, but it doesn't necessarily help you all that much. You've got to understand where you're at positionally a lot faster, and then have things positionally. And you know, that's been one of my things since the beginning. I was always doing situation drills to where I was like trying to make strides in grappling and everything else. And I said, okay, I've got to find the main positions that work. So I started doing the research and started running the stats. And, you know, lo and behold, the most successful positions were armbar, triangle, rear naked choke. You know, you had to have be able to get in mount or out of mount, and you know, a couple other positions like side control. You know, those are kind of your main ones. And so it's like, well, you've got to just do a lot of situation drills, a lot of resistance reps from those positions if you want to be good at them. And the same thing is true for takedowns. You've just got to be willing to put in some resistance reps. You got to do the entries. You got to get in on a leg and say, okay, now you're going to sprawl. I'm going to try to finish, or you know, I'm going to get a 2-on-1 and then I'm going to attack you here, or, you know, just adding in those elements will go a long way if you're willing to do it. And so those would be my kind of keys for getting somebody better faster from the standing position.